podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AEye Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AEye Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AEye Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to AEye Scouted on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Dave Hendrick, joined as always by Mr. Karl Matchett. How are you, sir?
Spectacular. How are you?
I'm good. I'm celebrating 10 years ranting and raving on Anfield Index, so I'm feeling chipper.
Congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you. How long have you been doing these podcasts? Is it 6-7 years now?
I don't honestly know, to be honest. I didn't mark it in my calendar. I probably didn't expect it to continue with my voice over the airwaves in this manner, so no idea.
Well, there you go. I have a feeling you were on my another podcast years ago, so it's probably about 8 years since your first Anfield Index appearance. But you've been motoring strong since we began doing Scouted together, so that's always fun. And you've obviously done Raw as well, a big part of the Raw. You got a couple of shout-outs there on the 2-hour extravaganza, myself and Downey did at the weekend. Right. We were set a task on the Twitter machine by Gordon, to pick our Premier League teams of the decades for the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. We, and by we I mean I, have imposed a rule where the player must have played at least 3 years in that decade to qualify for the team. So just to make it a little bit fairer, so that we recognize a little bit of longevity. So let's cast ourselves back to the 1990s. Do you want to go team by team? Do you want to go position by position? How do you want to do this?
90s, and then we'll go to the 2000s after all the 90s are done. Yeah.
Right. So, you can start. Who is give me your? Have you picked like uniform shape or anything for this, or is it just?
I've tried to go
for different.
Yeah, I've tried to go the prevailing formation of the day as such. So obviously 1990s is very, very firmly 4-4-2.
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly what I've done. So give me your goalkeeper and back four to begin with.
Okay. I wrote down 3 different goalkeeper names and changed my mind each time. I've landed on Peter Schmeichel. He's the one I've gone with in the end. I did consider Dave Seaman first of all, and then I had a bit of a look back to see when Neville Southall's reign of terror ended between the sticks. And although qualifies perfectly fine, I think his best and greatest was somewhat slightly earlier than the peak era we're looking at. So I think Peter Schmeichel was the first all-round, unstoppable, unpassable monster that I really remember watching. So I've gone with him. Centre-backs, Tony Adams, the first name. I think he was, just a very, very, very good, very consistent centre-back at all the basic things that your centre-back used to have to do. And with the added bonus of probably being one of the best leaders of that era as well. Obviously a very different type of football at that time compared to the modern day, but insofar as what they had to do there, I don't really remember too many. Much more consistent, much more fearless, just very excellent all-round centre-backs than him. And to be honest, there were a few options to go alongside him, but there were obviously a couple of dominant teams throughout the 90s Premier League time, at least. I've gone in the end with Gary Pallister alongside him, again from United and Arsenal. It could have been any number of players, but that's who I picked. I'll stick with just the triangle for now, and we'll see what you've got.
So we've got 2 of the 3 the same. I went with Peter Schmeichel in goal. Seaman was worth consideration. Tim Flowers had some very, very good years. Nigel Martin had some very good years. But ultimately, Schmeichel, just season after season, was very, very good, very consistent, and he won United a lot of points. So he's my goalkeeper. Tony Adams is one of my centre-backs. Tony Adams was what people think John Terry was as a defender, a genuinely great defender, and he was good on the ball. I think Adams could play in the modern game and not have too many problems. The other one came down to two. It came down to Gary Pallister and Paul McGrath, and I went with Paul McGrath. Footballer of the Year the first year of the Premier League. He was brilliant the first 3 years of the division. Then, obviously, the knee injuries and he retired. Pallister, also a Footballer of the Year, but he won his before the advent of the Premier League, so I dinged him a little bit on that. But Gary Pallister is, I think, historically the most underrated defender the Premier League has seen. When I see people talk about Rio Ferdinand as one of the greatest Premier League centre-backs of all time, I just have to laugh because, for me, he's the fourth best United centre-back of this era. Stam, Pallister would be second for me, and Vidic would be third. But I did go with Paul McGrath because I just think if you look back on those early Premier League seasons, you'll struggle to find anybody who week in, week out, in any position for any team, was better than him. And Aston Villa were one of the best teams in the league while he was at his very best. They finished second in the first season of the Premier League. In that second season, they were also a strong team, though dropped off into mid-table, but had a good run in one of the cups, ended up qualifying for a UEFA Cup berth. I would go with him just a notch over Pallister. Now, McGrath's best days definitely came before the Premier League as well, but I just don't think you can ignore those first 3 years. And even the fourth year with Villa, 95, 96, he was very good. The next season, he moved on to Derby, and he was good with them. So I think you can go 4 really good years and 1 good year for him in the Premier League era, and that to me gets him in just over Pallister, who was great. I mean, Gary Pallister was great. There's no question about it.
Gary Pallister, and obviously this not as a direct comparison between the two, but just because it's not a be-all and end-all kind of recognition either. And we know that there can sometimes be nonsense, but when there's such consistency to it, it should tell people who didn't get to see him play or don't remember him playing just how good he was. Gary Pallister got in the PFA Team of the Year 7 times.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He's so often overlooked. And you see people say, oh, well, and he played 22 times for England. Well, in part, that was because Graham Taylor was an idiot. It was also because Gary Pallister would get pulled out of England squads by Alex Ferguson, citing a minor back issue, because he did have ongoing back problems. Pallister wouldn't train half the week because he couldn't get out of bed because his back would lock up. And yet, come match day, he would be imperious. And it's a shame that we never got to see Pallister next to Stam. He was sold as Stam came in the door, because I always thought that pairing stylistically would have been just about perfect. Gary Pallister was a great player. Like, he genuinely was a great player and worked his way up through the divisions with Borough, joined United, never missed a step, was tremendous, went back to Borough and was still very good in those latter years of his career. Gary Pallister absolutely deserves, and I have no argument with you putting him in your team, because it was literally Adams plus one of these two, and I just went with McGrath because he did win Footballer of the Year.
So who have you gone for at fullback?
At left back, I don't think there's a conversation to be had. It's Dennis Irwin. I think he's the best left back the Premier League has ever seen, but certainly the best of this decade. Right back, there is a conversation, but it's more a conversation of who do you pick which is often the situation at right back in this league. Gary Neville is worth a mention because once he came into the United team, he was very consistent, never spectacular, but he was a consistent player. Rob Jones had some excellent seasons for us. Warren Barton was a very solid right back for a number of years. But I went with Dan Petrescu, who, for me, was just a notch above the rest and never quite got the recognition he deserved. But came into the division with Sheffield Wednesday, having moved from Genoa, had a great season with them, moved to Chelsea, and was just consistently excellent game after game. Very much in that kind of Zabaleta, Azpilicueta kind of mold as a defender, just those sort of dogged, great 1v1, read the game well, very intelligent, but he could add a little bit more on the ball than they could. And you look at the goal numbers of Chelsea, he scored 18 goals in 5 seasons from right back. It's pretty impressive. So I've gone with Dan Petrescu.
Not too much disagreement. I went with Rob Jones as my right back option, and the only other two left backs I could even think of putting in a conversation were Stuart Pearce and Graham Lasso, and I don't think either of them were as good or as consistent as Irwin. So I picked Irwin.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Rob Jones, I mean, people forget just how good he was when he joined us. And up until he started having the shin splints issue and then the knee issue, he was outstanding. I've never fully understood why we signed McAteer, played him as a wing-back out of position, and then moved Rob Jones out of position. Because Rob Jones was England's best right-back, and we moved him. I didn't understand why we didn't play McAteer in the middle with Redknapp, have Redknapp sit and McAteer go box to box. Because at that point, John Barnes shouldn't have been a regular starter. And if we'd gone Jones, McAteer, Redknapp, and even Stigginga Bjornaby as the left wing back, I think that would have been a much better balance than what we ended up with. Obviously, then you'd Scales or Mark Wright, Ruddock, and Babb as the back three. But Rob Jones was so good. He's Graham Souness's best signing for us by a country mile for 300 grand. And he made his debut 2 days after signing from a Division 3 team at Old Trafford against Ryan Giggs, who was probably the best young player in world football at the time. And he completely marked him out of the game. Rob Jones was great. So yeah, no arguments against Rob Jones. Moving into midfield, I'll give you my middle two, and then you can give me your middle two and your wide two. I've gone Scholes and Keane. I think Roy Keane he's the best central midfielder the league has ever seen. He's the best captain the league has seen, the best leader, the best winner. He was incredible in the 90s. Pre-knee injury, Roy Keane was just incredible, could do absolutely everything. And Paul Scholes, to me, could easily have made the 2000s team as well. But you look at that early era of Scholes in that midfield with Keane, getting, double figures goals a lot of seasons, dictating games. I think he's become historically massively underrated as well. Like when I hear the Gerrard, Scholes, Lampard debate, I often wonder why Lampard is mentioned. Gerrard and Scholes is the debate. And I think Gerrard was the better player. But this idea that Gerrard could do everything Scholes could do, but Scholes couldn't do everything Gerrard could do, it just isn't true. Gerrard couldn't run a game like Paul Scholes. He didn't have Paul Scholes' intelligence. He didn't have his ability to just dictate a game the way Scholes did. So I think Scholes is hugely underrated. And I've gone with him next to Keane. Is that pairing itself was just phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to go with a literal pairing, it's probably not going to be one that's better than them. That's fine. I've actually gone for someone you just mentioned before, which was more to the start of his 90s or the middle of the 90s rather than the end middle that you were talking about there before, but John Barnes, alongside Roy Keane. So, I mean, Barnes at the start of the 90s was like his last sort of year and a half of playing in the forward line before his injury. And that 1991 season, he was still just unbelievably astonishing. That was obviously from a wider position. But then from 92-93, he was back in the middle. And so for 2 years there, around the 93 to 95 sort of era, I think he was still very, very much an exceptional player. Really, really difficult to get the ball off. Controlled the game like nobody you'd see, in a very, very different style of them, and completely reinvented himself as a player. So that was obviously as a central midfield player there. He had people doing the running for him, no problem. But very much someone who could be the best footballer on the pitch any given weekend, even if it was at a slower pace or a lower tempo than anybody else, but still capable of raising that game tempo, and still had a really big say on Liverpool's score in the final third, let's say. You know, his range of passing, he's still got on the score sheet plenty. Set pieces were obviously a big thing for him as well. So I've gone with Barnes and Keane.
Cool. Just to give a nod of the cap to Gary McAllister, who for Leeds and then Coventry was just consistently excellent throughout this decade. We all think of him coming to Liverpool and how important he was at Liverpool. But Gary McAllister for Leeds, especially, you know, when they won the league title and then the few years after that, was a tremendous footballer. And when he went to Coventry...
Are you that person who has everything? The coolest merch and those must-have fan threads? Well, over at our Anfield Index shop, we've gone that extra mile when it comes to pimping up your Liverpool collection. From our popular range of bespoke design t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies and hats, to our signature edition mugs, prints and coasters, all provided with fast worldwide shipping. We have something for every red. We also stock official LFC merchandise and are licensed with the Premier League and UEFA to sell official iron-on shirt badges and sleeve patches. As a listener to this podcast, you can get 10% off everything with coupon code AEyePro10. Just head over to AnfieldIndex.shop or find us on Etsy by searching for Anfield Index.
I was staggered. Like, him doing what he did then was very similar to what Pirlo was doing, sitting deep in that midfield and just literally pinging the ball here, there and everywhere. And, you know, when he went to Coventry, he was obviously in his 30s already. He was 32 going to Coventry, and he gave them 4 great years. So Gary Mack, just worthy of a mention. Who do you have in your wide positions then?
So alongside Gary Mack, actually, someone else I almost had in this team for one of the wide positions, played in the same team as McAllister, which is why I mentioned him now, was Gary Speed. But he was going to go in my team centrally. But in the end, I think he was maybe fifth, maybe sixth. And in the wide areas, maybe third, because he obviously played left midfield for them for quite a while. In the end, I've gone with Giggs on the left.
Yeah.
And I've gone with... you usually do this, I usually don't, but I've gone with Ginola, who also played left for the vast majority of the time, but I wanted him in the team, and I didn't see a must have right-sided player. I mean, there's one or two obvious options to be called the best one of them, but I think Ginola's impact and Ginola's performances were maybe better, more important, maybe more individually impressive than some of those. So I've gone for those two.
I've gone with Giggs. I just don't think you can debate Giggs in the 90s. I just think he was incredible. Like you, there was nobody that really screamed that they had to be in on the right. Beckham would have the best case. Yeah. Keith Gillespie had a couple of great years with Newcastle. Ray Parlour was obviously very consistent for Arsenal, but never a great player. You could look at the early 90s with Gordon Strachan to stay on the Leeds thing. And I gave very strong consideration to David Ginola, but I went with Steve McManaman because I think he was the best player in the league for 2 years. I think he was Liverpool's best player in that decade. I think Steve McManaman, body of work, longevity, and consistency gets him in over David Ginola for me. But you remember as well when Ginola arrived at Newcastle and just the flamboyance, the ability to go either side outside and cross with the left, inside and shoot with the right. He just had it all. Yeah. Fantastic player. The other one I considered, and he just made it in on the 3-year level, was Mark Overmars, who was fantastic for Arsenal in the late 90s. But I decided to go with McManaman. I just don't think he gets nearly enough credit for how good he was in the 90s for us. Like, he carried a very average Liverpool team to top 4 finishes year after year after year. And I know he had Fowler, and I know he got Owen, but Fowler went missing a lot with injuries. Owen had some injuries and he was a child. McManaman turned up game after game, and teams were game planning specifically to stop Steve McManaman. He was one of the first players in England to get man-marked on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I just think Steve McManaman, from the 91-92 season when he made his breakthrough up until 98-99 when he left, I just think he was... Other than that, the last season was a bit ropey because obviously the falling out with Houllier. But up until, say, from 91 to 98, I just think he was amazing. So I went with Stevie Mac, but no problem with Ginola. One of the most entertaining players that the league has ever seen.
Who are your 9 and 10 then?
My 9 is Shearer. Shearer, to me, was the first name I actually wrote down because just the goals. Like, it's stupid numbers of goals. The other spot was a little bit more difficult because I considered Fowler, realised then there were probably some better options. And I came down to 2. And they were actually a partnership together at Arsenal. So it came down to Ian Wright or Dennis Bergkamp for me. And I went with Bergkamp. Now, Gianfranco Zola and Cantona I also considered when I was thinking, okay, well, who'd actually work best with Shearer? And I went with Bergkamp. There's been very few players that have ever given me as much joy to watch play for another team than Dennis Bergkamp, so I went with him.
I've gone with the same two, Bergkamp and Shearer. I don't think we really need to debate too much around them. I think Shearer is the easiest pick of this. He was the second name I wrote down after Keane, but there's more competition probably, or more alternative styles of midfield pairings you can put together than Keane, obviously. But if you're just looking for starting point, your goals, your number 9, it is just Shearer. That's it.
Yeah, it is. It's just Alan Shearer. And like, the thing is, he was that good despite multiple serious injuries, like a torn ACL, a fractured ankle, and he still scored that many goals. He's one of the few players that you would dread seeing anytime. He was just so good and so consistent. Right. So let's move on. Actually, just to give a rundown, my 90s team then: Schmeichel, Petrescu, McGrath, Adams, Irwin, McManaman, Scholes, Keane, Giggs, Shearer, Bergkamp. And yours was?
Michael, Rob Jones, Adams, Pallister and Irwin, Ginola, Keane, Barnes and Giggs, and Bergkamp and Shearer.
Cool. On to the 2000s. I'll go the triangle first then. I went with Petr Cech in goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's just, over that decade, he's the one that stands out. Though, obviously, Edwin van der Sar would be absolutely worthy of a spot. I went with Carvalho and Sol Campbell as my 2 centre-backs. I thought Carvalho's arrival at Chelsea prompted one of the great defensive eras that any team has had. I think he was just a phenomenal defender, like a phenomenal defender. Came in with this reputation as being somewhat cultured and turned out to just be the gnarliest bastard that any of us had ever seen. And Sol Campbell, he just gets forgotten about too often in conversations about the great English centre-backs. I think Sol Campbell, he was great for Spurs. Him joining Arsenal, you'll remember the back pages, because back then it's pre-internet, pre-social media. We didn't know that Sol Campbell was about to sign for Arsenal. And then it happened, and it was just this massive thing that Sol Campbell, captain of Spurs, had signed for the biggest rival. And he was incredible for Arsenal. Like,
On a free, no less.
On a free. On a free. The Spurs fans, it must have... I wouldn't imagine... Even Kane leaving can't have hurt as much.
Well, I think it's the shock factor, like you've just said.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like Kane has been in talks and Kane has been year after year, but, this was just literally like waking up, no idea of what's going on, probably go to the shop and not even get ready to get a paper, and then you just see the headlines and then you just like immediately feel sick. That's all it kind of been. Must be a joke. It wasn't.
Just him on the back page holding up an Arsenal jersey with Arsene Wenger, and you're thinking, that can't be a real picture. There's just no way that's a real picture. Yeah. So I've Check, Carvalho, and Campbell. Who have you got?
Very, very similar. Van der Sar and Reina were my considerations, but Czech, I think, was just a notch above both of them. He was... The biggest thing I remember about Petr Cech is just his ability was beyond everybody else's to just reach shots that they shouldn't have been able to reach, that they shouldn't have been able to save. Just this enormous wingspan where even if it was going right in the corner across the face of goal or into the top corner from miles out, he was able to somehow get there and claw it away. He was so difficult to beat. So I think he was overall the best one. I also picked Sol Campbell just ahead of Nemanja Vidic, who I think was superb, unfortunately, for quite annoyingly long amount of time. So definitely got those two in my team. The other one I went with in the end was Sami Hyypiä, just because I think he was just revolutionary, really, in terms of how good he was from nowhere as well. Like, it's one thing, obviously, waking up and finding your best player has gone to your biggest rival, but Sami Hyypiä came in and,
we signed who?
Yeah.
He's finished.
The biggest player that we signed that week was Stefan Onsho in terms of their names, but Hyypiä was the one. He was the leader. He was just like, I know people, I watch a lot of football even then. I'd never seen him play. No. I know a lot of people who didn't even know the team who he'd come from. It was just a complete unknown at that time for fans on this side, obviously. And it was astonishing watching how good he was, how consistent he was, how long it lasted for, the whole thing.
So in the same vein as people not knowing who he was, my uncle told me that Liverpool had signed some big Finnish fella from William II. And I was like, what? Yeah, they've signed some big Finnish centre-back from William II. Who is he? I don't know his name, but he's some big Finnish fella. That's all I know. I was like, that can't be right. And I went on Teletext or CFAX, one of them. And there it was. Liverpool signed Sami Hyypiä from Willem II. It's like, who the fuck is Sami Hyypiä? We found out. We found out who he was. An unbelievably good player. Right. Give me your fullbacks. Right. Left back should be easy.
Yeah, left back I thought was dead easy. It's Stig Inge Bjorneby. Ashley Cole.
Gregory Vignal, no?
Yes, definitely. No, it's Ashley Cole. It just is. It's an obvious one, I think. Right back I thought was actually difficult because I know, like, obviously Gary Neville is the big name here and he was very consistent and had the longest time. But I was never a massive fan of him. And obviously there's the colouring of the fact that he played for the team I disliked the most, and that's fine. And maybe I'm just wrong because of that. But I always thought that there were far more dynamic right backs who played well for their teams, were more important for their teams, and still defended really well. So at the start of the year, I think Gary Kelly the start of the decade, I think Gary Kelly was still an option in that conversation. Yeah. But across the course of that, at least half a decade, I liked Stephen Carr a lot. So I've gone for him. It was mainly for Spurs, obviously, at that period.
That's a hell of a shout. I did like Stephen Carr, and I did give him consideration. I didn't go with him in the end. I considered Steve Finnan because he was just so reliable for us. I considered Arbeloa, but I don't think he qualified with the game with the years. Like you, Neville is the one that just immediately springs to mind because he was really consistent. In the same way, like I did consider Lee Dixon for the previous decade. He was just consistent, but he was consistently annoying as well. I went with Loren of Arsenal because like you, it was just, I felt like he was more important for Arsenal than Neville was for United. If Neville wasn't in the United team, they weren't losing because of that.
Yeah.
But when Loren was missing from Arsenal, even though Oleg Lushny would come in and be solid, he didn't give them the same attacking threat that Loren gave them. And everyone talks about that Arsenal unbeaten team and Kolo Toure and Sol Campbell. I mean, Kolo's personality kind of elevated him above his actual station as a footballer. Campbell was incredible. Cole was incredible. In midfield, you had Lundberg, who was a goal scorer. You had Perez, who was a playmaker. Gilberto Silva and Vieira is one of the best centre midfield pairings of all time. And you had Bergkamp and you had Henry. But what's often forgotten is when they would attack, everybody remembers how well they attacked down the left with Cole, Perez and Henry. But people forget that Freddie Ljungberg would abandon that right side and get himself into the box all the time. And Loren was basically a one-man mission up and down that right side. And Arsenal were very hard to break down on that right side. Even though the left side was their stronger side, he was so consistently good that it was really hard to get them that side as well. Even though you'd look at Kolo and think, that's the one to get at. Loren's ability to sweep behind them, to step in front of him, meet runners, to lock down wingers 1v1. I went with Loren. Stephen Carr is a good shout, but I just think Loren in that decade was excellent. Fair, Gary Neville was a good player. Like there's no shade towards him here. Gary Neville was a good player. But you don't think back on his career and think, do you remember that game where Gary Neville was unbelievable, where he was like 9 out of 10? There isn't Gary Neville games like that. And then when he had the bad ankle injury, he did lose a bit of what made him good going forward. Like he was always really good on the overlap and a decent crosser. After the ankle injury, he had to rein his game in a little bit, and he wasn't quite the same. So I went with Loren. Yeah, I mean, there is no standout right back in that era, as the same as the previous era. There's no Irwin, there's no Ashley Cole.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of good right backs, and it is basically take your pick, really, isn't it?
Yeah, Pascal Chimbonda is a good example of this. There were a lot of right backs who had like 1 year where they were quite good, and sometimes got a transfer and then didn't really do anything afterwards. Like even Arsenal, like they had at fullback both sides. Like Clichy was pretty good for a couple of years.
Yeah,
Sanya was pretty good for a couple of years, but none of them really, even after going to Man City, you would say like, unbelievable. Like they have to be in every single conversation. So I think it's fair. You could have picked probably any for that side, that era, and still been able to come up with good arguments as to why they could or should.
Without question. Right, into midfield. My midfield pair, I've gone Vieira. Patrick Vieira is just one of the best midfield players I've ever seen. And the only person making a repeat appearance for me is Roy Keane. I've picked him over Paul Scholes in central midfield. Keane and Vieira. I would have paid incredible amounts of money to watch them play together because everybody would have been just terrified of them. And watching them battle year after year after year together, or against each other rather, is still one of the it's the best rivalry the league has seen in terms of player versus player. And obviously that United Arsenal rivalry, Ferguson hated Wenger, Wenger hated Ferguson, Keane hated Vieira, and vice versa. You had Martin Keown against Van Nistelrooy, you had Giggs against Loren, you had Neville against everybody because everybody hated him, but Neville against Perez. There's so many great rivalries within that rivalry, but Keane and Vieira is the one that stood out. And for me, I just have to have them both in. A lot of people seem to think Roy Keane fell off a cliff in the 2000s. He didn't at all. He was great for the first half of the decade, and then his hip went, and Ferguson and him fell out, and he was out the door. But he was still at United until the 05-06 season. And for the first 5 seasons of the decade, he was still outstanding. And obviously him and Vieira left at the same time. Oh, well, Vieira actually left a couple of months before Keane, but I've gone Vieira Keane.
Yeah, I've imposed my own rule that I didn't want anyone appearing twice, so I am not allowed to put Keane in, and that's part of the reason I had Keane and Barnes together for the last one. So I've this time gone for Gerrard and Vieira.
I haven't. Well, see, Gerrard didn't play enough in the central midfield area for me to warrant putting him in central midfield, and I don't think he was ever particularly great in central midfield. But he is in my team for this decade without question. I just couldn't put him in central midfield.
Yeah, I've got 4-2-3-1-ish here anyway, so we can have the same conversation, and I'll tell you my number 10 now, and therefore flip them around just to appease you. So I've got Vieira and Scholes as my central mid, and I've got Gerrard as my 10.
That's fine. That I can live with. That I love. Yeah. In fact, that I love.
We got 4-4-2 for the 90s, 4-2-3-1 for this one, and 4-3-3 for the 2010s for mine. So there you go.
I went 4-4-2 for this decade just because there was two strikers I felt like I had to get in.
Only two? This is a tough one for the forwards.
Well, there's one that I don't think is tough at all.
No.
But there was one I wanted to get in, but I'm willing to move him out again. Because, like, I did strongly consider going with Michael Essien, but I couldn't put Keane, Essien and Vieira in the one team because it just wouldn't have been right. I've gone Gerrard right side and I've gone Cristiano left side. So Gerrard, Keane, Vieira, Cristiano is my midfield four.
It's not a bad midfield, to be fair.
I think they'll get it done for me.
So I've got Vieira, Scholes in the middle, Gerrard ahead. So my right and left. Pires and Ronaldo. Had to get Pires in somewhere, so a little bit similar to Ginola. He's pushed a bit, but he played right side plenty as well. I'm happy with him in there.
Yeah, and I mean Cristiano can play either side as well, so they can switch and swap.
Ronaldo started right wing most of the time for United, so
until those late that kind of Tevez Rooney era, like when Tevez and Rooney were in the team, he went left side then and. He could play either and was equally as effective. Right. So you've put Bobby Pires in and I think it's absolutely warranted. I mean, footballer of the year, incredible in the unbeaten season, came back from an ACL tear. The only players I've seen in my entire time watching a game tear their ACL and come back at exactly well, not exactly the same level, but really close to the same level straight away, are Virgil van Dijk and Robert Pires. And Pires was stupidly good. Stupidly good. And another one of those signings that when Arsenal got him, you were like, who is he? Oh, okay. And then he turns out to be unbelievable because Wenger just had some sort of warlock nature going on back then. My front two, you've got a front one, I've got a front two. I think one of mine will be your one. It's Thierry Henry. I think he's arguably the greatest player in Premier League history. I do think that's under threat by a certain Egyptian, but for now I still have Henry as number one all time in the Premier League. And I picked Didier Drogba. He was so good for Chelsea in the 2000s. And I know the goal numbers don't pop off and don't suggest that he was an all-timer, but that team under Mourinho and then under Ancelotti doesn't work without him. So I went with Didier Drogba, but he'd be the one I'd be happy enough to drop out to bring in somebody else. So like to bring in Pires and move Gerrard to a 10 spot just off of him. Drogba would be the one, but I wanted to put him in. I do think he was great.
That's fair enough. I mean, I personally don't have him quite as high as that, and I think that there are loads of options up front in the 2000s. It was quite an era of classic nines, let's say, slightly more mobile, slightly more aggressive, slightly more all-round than, let's say, a 1990s number 9, but still played up front and led the line, We had Anelka. There was Fernando Torres. Drogba, you mentioned. There were plenty of players there. I've only got one, so it had to be Henry because I do think he was a class above most of the others. So
Yeah.
all of the others, obviously, I picked him. So, but yeah, I think any of the others that you pick, especially depending on the rest of your team, if you're actually at that time, you're not going to go far wrong. Let's be honest.
So we both had Keane and well, I had Shearer first, then Keane. You had Keane first, then Shearer for the 90s. Who were your two for this decade that you were just like, they're in and I'll build it around them? For me, it was Henry and Gerrard.
Henry first for me. And I mean, technically, the second name that I would have wrote down was actually Cole, just because I thought he was a no-brainer. But I would have had then either Gerrard or which other central mid I was having, because it was, like I said, I was trying to fit them all in and not duplicate them in different eras. So Gerrard, Keane or Vieira, whichever one I switched, which was obviously Vieira in the end, and Henry.
Right, on to the 2010s. Just to wrap my team, check Neville, Carvalho, Campbell, Cole, Gerrard, Keane, Vieira, Cristiano, Henry, check Loren, Neville's in my head, Carvalho, Campbell, Cole, Henry, Drogba up front. Yours was...
Petr Cech in goal, Stephen Carr right back, Sammy Hyypiä, Sol Campbell, Ashley Cole, Paul Scholes and Vieira, Gerrard ahead, Pires, Ronaldo, Thierry Henry.
Yeah, very, very strong. Right, 2010s, and you're correct, it is a 4-3-3 generation. I think this is where we will differ on a few.
Yeah, me too.
I'd be surprised if we have the same fullbacks. We might have the same front three, and we'll probably have some overlap in midfield. The centre-backs, I feel confident we will have the same too. So give me your triangle then, your goalkeeper, your two centre-backs.
Right, in goal, I've gone for David De Gea. I think consistency across the entire decade of, obviously, the parties there, how much he's called upon, how important he was for the team, all of that. I think I had to put him in the end. There are obviously candidates, let's say, but just think that he was too often the one who made a difference. So I had to go with him in the end. Centre-back partnership, I've gone for the players without which I don't think these teams win the title, basically, when they did. Obviously, the title for one of them hasn't necessarily come in this decade, but still the big impact he had, Company and Van Dijk.
Yeah, so we have the same two centre-backs. I think they were quite easy picks. Toby Alderweireld, worth a mention, but not much more than that.
And Vertonghen, to be fair.
Vertonghen as well, but I would always have thought of him as a level below the other three. But yeah, Company and Virgil, no question there. I went with Thibaut Courtois in goal, but as you were talking, I was thinking there's probably 3 David De Gea seasons where United were garbage and he single-handedly made them a decent to good team. And I don't think you can say the same of Courtois, where he single-handedly galvanized a team and raised the level, even though I think he was outstanding. He did win 2 league titles, though.
I mean, you're not getting relegated with either keeper.
You're not. I'll just stick with Courtois. He's the one I went with. I'll just stick with him. But yeah, De Gea was phenomenal. Before the 2018 World Cup, everything up to that point, he was one of the best keepers anyone had ever seen. Top 10 probably ever. Or on the trajectory to be top 10 ever. Since then, it's weird. He just became error-prone and kind of hesitant, which is kind of what he was when he first arrived. But yeah, he was at his best. That like I said, those seasons under Van Gaal and under Mourinho, he was just stupidly good. Stupidly good. Right. Fullbacks. Here I believe we will have different choices, possibly on both sides. I've gone Branislav Ivanovic at right back.
Okay.
Body of work, consistency, I don't think Trent really hit his groove until the 2020s. So I went with Branislav Ivanovic. Now, Trent obviously has a couple of great years in this decade. Kyle Walker's worth a mention. Zabaleta was outstanding for a big chunk of this decade as well. But with Branislav Ivanovic at right back, you just knew you weren't getting anything down that side. So I went with him. And at left back, I went with his former teammate, Cesar Azpilicueta, who was just 8 out of 10 every single week for about 6 years. Play left back, he was the best in the league. Moved to right back, he was the best in the league. Played in the back three, he was incredible, despite being 5'6". He's probably 5'9", but he's not tall. I just had to get both of them in. I just think, from a defensive point of view, they were flawless defensively, and they could both offer something going forward. Ivanovic was a huge threat from set pieces, and Azpilicueta was a very underrated crosser of the ball, who got more assists, I think, than people. Not a huge amount, not Robbo or Trent levels, but for the type of fullback he was, he got a lot more than people thought. So I've gone Ivanovic, Company, Virgil, and Aspie as my back four.
Well, we actually only have one difference in the fullbacks. So I also went with Ivanovic because he was, we talk about the Neville and the other options for the 2000s, where they could be pretty good going forward, sometimes quite explosive going forward, but still solid defensively. Ivanovic was incredible defensively, like rarely did anyone get the better of him, but also had a really big impact in attack. Like that, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I used to get so annoyed at the number of goals, important contributions he would make in the final third, especially late in matches or in what seemed like every single time he played a cup match, he would be the one to get the extra time winner or anything like that. It was just an absolute menace. So good in the air. It was like having a third centre back in set pieces because he was so good in the air and obviously was a central defender for a large portion of his career. So I had to go with him. He was superb. The other two considerations, in addition to the names you mentioned, Patrice Evra obviously would be one. I eventually went with Leighton Baines, who I think
that's a good shout.
Yeah, I think he was unbelievably consistent, to be honest. Maybe not the quickest player, but still really quite good in terms of matching wingers he was up against. His delivery was second to none. And considering he played in a god-awful team for far too long of his career, he was always really good, really consistent. Just a very, very good performer all around.
Yeah, Leighton Baines, no argument there. Very, very good player. The only thing you'd knock him on was he was fucking atrocious in the air because he's about 5'5". So when teams figured that out, you could target him a little bit, but he figured out ways to make it work. One name I've overlooked, he won't get in my team, but worthy of mention at right back is his partner, Seamus Coleman, who was consistently excellent. Like, those two played in some god-awful Everton teams and were still really, really good season after season. So definite mention to Seamus Coleman. Evra is a good shout as well, especially in the early part of the decade, obviously. But I operate a pretty strong no dickhead policy, so unfortunately he's out. Into midfield then. There's a chance we have the same midfield. But I'm going to guess we have two the same and one different. So give me your three.
Okay. Now, I will preface this by saying I've changed my midfield quite a lot of times. I kept thinking I had a really good, strong one and then remembering or finding another player and thinking, well, they've got to go in. So I've ended up with N'Golo Kante, Kevin De Bruyne, and David Silva.
Hello, I'm here to annoy you. I'm here to annoy you into listening to more of me and more of others on EPL Index. We don't just have the Anfield Index stuff. We've got EPL Index as well, which covers the entirety of the Premier League. And we have 3 podcasts and a whole bunch of really good writing on EPLindex.com. The podcasts are my own two-footed podcast, which is every day at 4 p.m, Monday through Friday, covering the whole league. We have A Tad Predictable, hosted by Tadiwa. You know Tadiwa, he does Anfield Index. He presents A Tad Predictable before every Premier League match week. And then Kevin De Vries and his crew on the EPL Roundtable, they're every week after the Premier League match week. So make sure you listen to everything we're doing on EPL Index and follow us there on Twitter at EPL Index. Thank you. Bye-bye. We have exactly the same midfield.
Oh, God. Okay.
Yeah. I had Fernandinho in initially because I just thought that's the best midfield of the decade and they were brilliant together. And then N'Golo Kante, I was just like, it has to be like, even though if you're putting the team on a pitch to play a game, I would rather have Fernandinho with KDB and Silva because the balance is better because he's an actual holding midfielder. But N'Golo Kante was a better player than Fernandinho, and his peak, that year at Leicester and those first couple of years at Chelsea were just like phenomenal.
Yeah, I actually started with Kante and Matic as my starting pair, and then I decided to change to a 3-man midfield, obviously. And I actually had in Yaya Toure alongside them, and I thought that was exceptional. And then I remembered Kevin De Bruyne actually qualified for this decade. Somehow it seems like he's been playing for 400 years at this point. So he had to go in, obviously. And then, a later scan, obviously, David Silva had to go in as well.
Yeah, initially I had David Silva left wing in mind, and then I moved him back because I was looking around and I was thinking I might go 4-2-3-1 here. So I had him left wing and I had KDB and Fernandinho's double pivot. And I was like, I don't like that double pivot. I'll move Silva back into midfield. And then I went with N'Golo instead of Fernandinho. But, I mean, Yaya Toure is a tough one to leave out. Mm-hmm. He was a force of nature. He was an absolute force of nature. Like, the very best case for Ryan Gravenberch is he becomes Yaya Toure. That's the very best case scenario. He has the talent, perfect. He has the build, he has the technique. Does he have that drive to just take over games? We'll find out in time. But there's a lot of good options in that decade. I mean, I should have mentioned him in the 2000s, but he warrants mention in this decade as well because he was great for the first half of it. But Michael Carrick, Michael Carrick is another one that's just historically disgustingly underrated. A tremendous player. Right, front three. We'll definitely have one or two the same here. Maybe all three. The 3-year rule that I put in place was largely to enable me to put in 2 players. We might actually have all three the same. I've gone Salah, Kane, and Suarez.
We do indeed have the same front three.
Yeah. Doff of the cap to Eden Hazard, who had a couple of incredible seasons and was a tremendous player. You're just not on that level, I'm afraid. Sadio Mane, worth mention. A couple of others that are absolutely, Alexis Sanchez, Arsenal era, not United era. But Salah is a no-brainer. Kane is a no-brainer. And I think while Henry is the greatest player the Premier League has seen when we factor in everything, I still don't think there's been a better player to play in the Premier League. And I include Cristiano because I'm talking about when they played in the league. I don't think anyone's touched Suarez's 13-14 season. I think that's it's the best season I've seen anyone have in the division. So, yeah, Salah, Kane and Suarez. So I've got Courtois, Ivanovic, Kompany, Virgil, Aspie, KDB, Kante, Silva, Salah, Kane and Suarez. And to be truthful, with that 5 attacking players and Kante going hunting the ball, I'm going to need those defensive fullbacks that I pick. So, yeah, just wrap me up with your team then.
David De Gea in goal, Ivanovic, Kompany, Van Dijk and Leighton Baines at the back. De Bruyne, Kante and David Silva in midfield, Salah, Kane and Suarez.
So I thought we'd have quite a bit of difference in that era, but we only had 2 players different, goalkeeper and left back. Pretty good.
Decent.
In our 2010s edition, we had two, three, four players different. And in the 90s, we had one, two, three, four, five players different. So we were pretty close in a lot of eras, and we got closer as it went along. Now, before we go, Guy Drinkle asked us to pick a most disappointing 11 of the Premier League season so far. So this is not worst performances. This is just based on expectation. Either what you expected of them or what was expected of them in the general public based on what they'd done last year or among their own fan base versus how they've actually performed. So I'll start you with my goalkeeper and then we can go from there. I've gone Aaron Ramsdale as my goalkeeper. Last season's team of the year choice somehow over Alisson. Dubbed Baby Alisson by the Arsenal fan base. The next Manuel Neuer by other portions of the Arsenal fan base, and has lost his place in the Arsenal team and is currently kicking his heels and considering his future despite having just been signed to a big new contract in the summer. So Aaron Ramsdale is my goalkeeper. Who've you got?
If they called him Baby Alisson, then I would say they are 50% correct. I think my opinions.
Did you see that clip of him talking about how he can't focus for 90 minutes?
Yes, I did. I didn't see that. It did. I mean, look, do you know what? I can't even be asked. I think I've spoken enough about Ramsdale. He's not even the first team performer anymore. I'm not talking about him anymore. I've gone for Robert Sanchez. I wouldn't say he's been underwhelming compared to what I thought about him. But considering of all the goalkeepers in all the world, for Chelsea restarting this massive program of theirs, that they went for him and paid as much as they did, himself, everybody should have been expecting more than has come of him. I don't think he's been desperate. I just don't think he's been very good.
I think that's fair. Right, into the back four.
Have we got a Guy team here as well, though?
Oh, yes, Guy Drinkle. Have you got your team?
I went Onana because, well, I thought it'd be a big improvement on De Gea. And he's not. He hasn't been. He's been worse.
That's fair. That's very fair.
You can leave his line a bit more, but in terms of actually saving stuff, he's much, much worse.
The third most expensive goalkeeper in the history of football, Andre Onana. Right back. Karl, who have you got?
I've gone for Joel Veltman. He's been pretty good for the last few years, but not great so far this season, whether he's just one of the ones who's just struggling a little bit with the adaptation to playing twice a week again, as he used to do earlier in his career, so he should be all right in terms of that, or whether it's just a downturn in form or whatever it is. Brighton as a whole, not quite as solid, not quite as consistent. I think he's been one of the ones you see by the fact he's in and out of the team now. It just kind of shows his performance levels have dipped quite considerably.
I think that's a very fair pick. There's been a lot of James Milner, which is obviously far too much James Milner, because any James Milner is too much James Milner. But Veltman has not performed well for Brighton. I've gone for Trent, which might be a bit controversial, but I've been disappointed this season in his attitude, his application defensively. I thought part of the decision to move him into midfield was that it might reinvigorate his effort level defensively. And there's still moments where he switches on and it's very good and he can stand up a winger and he can get the better of them. We saw it against Brighton. He had a couple of good moments against Matoma, a couple of bad as well, but a couple of good moments. But he's getting dribble past at an alarming rate. He is jogging back when he's beaten. He is not helping Ibu at all. Ibu is having to carry the load on the entire right side of our defence. And there's just been too many games where I feel like he's fallen in love with his long passing to the detriment of the team. So I've gone for Trent. Guy, who have you got?
I went for Trent as well. Considering the way he ended last season in midfield, or this role type thing, I thought he'd build on it massively and be great. And he just hasn't built on it at all, really.
I do think we can excuse some of it by the fact he doesn't have a proper partner in midfield as well, because Alexis just, he's not that player. He doesn't belong in that position. But yeah, I think Trent is fair enough. Left back, Guy.
I went Gvardiol, and I don't think he's been awful by any means, but considering I think he's the second most expensive centre back, he's playing kind of two roles. I don't think he's been really stand out in either, and maybe it's a bit of the Chelsea game recency bias. He obviously got kind of destroyed a little bit in that game, but considering the money he spent, what I've seen of him mainly in a Croatia shirt, he's been fine, but I don't think he's been this exceptional player I thought he'd be.
I went with the same person. I went with Gvardiol as well. I'm not sure. Nathan Ake was one of their best players last year, and I had him in my team of the season as left back. And when you spend as much money on Gvardiol to bring him in to replace Ake, I need your baseline to be at least as good as Ake was last season. And thus far, he's been nowhere close. So I went with him. Who have you got, Karl?
Well, while you guys went with Trent, I went with Andy Robertson, who I don't think was particularly good, full stop, at the start of the season. Did pick up in a couple of performances just before he got injured, but has obviously still played, eight of our 12 league games. So in that period beforehand, I don't think he was playing well.
No, neither do I. I think that's absolutely fair. Right, into centre-back. I'll give you my pair and then I'll come to you two. I've gone for Lewis Dunk, who I think has been genuinely dreadful for Brighton this year. I think he's starting to show significant signs of decline. He's never been the quickest, but he is backpedaling at a Martin Skirtle level of alarmingness at the moment, allowing strikers to advance 15, 20 yards and not making a challenge. And that's a concern. He's not been as good on the ball this season either. And given that he's now in and around the England mix, I think there was quite high expectations on him. And unfortunately, this is the first season that I've looked at Lewis Dunk and thought Brighton might want to start looking for a replacement for him. He just doesn't look the same player. Part of that is Veltman's not been good. There's been a lot of turbulence at left back. Webster's been a disaster. Igor hasn't settled in. I'm not a fan of Van Heck. The goalkeeper steal is garbage. But I just think Dunk has been every bit as bad as the rest of them. So I've gone with Lewis Dunk. And my second one, I've gone with Ruben Diaz. I just feel like he's spending far too much time flailing on the floor for absolutely no reason. He came into the league, had that great first year, and I don't think he's actually played anywhere near as well since. But this season, I think he's been particularly poor. Not just in the Chelsea game, where he was completely responsible for 2 goals. But you look back at that Wolves game as well, and he was dreadful. And I don't think he's been particularly good in a bunch of the other games. Like Fulham caused him problems. Even though City won 5-1, remember how that game went? He was not good in that game. He wasn't good against Sheffield United. He was not good against Brighton, where the movement of that Brighton front line caused him a lot of problems. I think Ruben Diaz is having a poor season. Now, he had a poor start to last season, found form at around Christmas, and then was good to very good the rest of the way. But I just don't think he's performing at anywhere close to the same level this year. So I've got Dunk and Diaz as my centre-backs. Karl, who have you got?
Well, I mean, considering they are where they are in the league table, I do think it's partly funny and partly just very concerning for if they do all click into gear that we all have a Man City defender. You two went for him at left back. I've gone for him in his other position, Gvardiol. Again, not because of innate crapness like some of the players in this team, but because you expect more from him. Because he's been way too easily beaten at times. So probably an element of this I think we should acknowledge is the obviously the changing tactical requirements in terms of positional work and when he goes forward and when he does not and all the rest of it. But by and large, you want more from him very, very quickly, and we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, Diaz, when I say he's been poor by his standards. Gvardiola's been poor by his standards. Dunk, I think, has been flat out poor. Trent has been poor by his standards.
Yeah.
These are great players that we expect great things from. And this is not worst 11. This is disappointing 11.
Yeah, underperformances. So
yeah, exactly. So I think Gvardiol is absolutely fair. And like I mentioned, like, look at the price tag. You spend that kind of money on a defender, you expect them to come in and immediately raise the level. And especially considering who he was brought in to replace and how good he'd been last year, I thought Gvardiol needs to come in and he needs to be 8 out of 10 every week, because last season Nathan Ake was 7 to 8 every single week. And Gvardiol hasn't done it yet, so that's fair. Who's your second centre-back?
Staying in the same part of the world, but across the other stadium, is Raphael Varane. I just think he's been just genuinely poor when he's been playing. Again, a lot of this is to do with the team and the organisation around him being absolutely rubbish, but his own performances have been well below where he would expect them to be as well.
Well, he's sitting on the bench while Harry Maguire is starting, and I think that tells us about everything we needed to tell us. Maguire was, persona non grata at United last season. They tried desperately to sell him in the summer, and you can make a very strong case that he's their best centre-back as things currently stand. The fact that Maguire and Johnny Evans have been picked ahead of a fully fit Raphael Varane speaks to how poor he's been. I wonder how much time he's currently dedicating to learning Arabic, pending a move next summer. But if you look at Maguire, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 starts in the Premier League in all of last season, which will tell you what the manager thought of him, because he was fit pretty much the entire season. This year, he's now started 5 games in a row in the league. It's his longest run in the team under this manager. And so much of that is not because he's been good. It's been because the others have been so poor. Both Varane and Martinez before he got hurt. Into midfield then. Karl, who
we'll do guys centre-backs.
Oh, I forgot guys centre-backs. Guy, who are your centre-backs?
I've gone for 2 out of 3. I initially had Varane and Ayeye in, and then I changed Ayeye to Dunk. And I don't know if I'm being harsh on Ayeye, because I thought he'd build on like a bit of an up and down season last year. It was obviously key in them getting what the hell it's called, the conference Vanarama, I think.
Conference.
That one, yeah. And I think he's been sent off a couple times. They've had a bit of very dodgy performances. So, but I think Varane and Dunk have been really bad, whereas Ayeye's been a bit up and down still. So maybe just disappointment of him not building on what he's been doing. But I think the other two have just been downright shite, really.
I think that's fair. I think Ayeye has been a disappointment. Now, he's not helped by the fact that he's got Emerson Palmieri as his left back, but yeah, he has been disappointing this year. I thought if he stays fit, he's probably going to be on the watch list for some of the top clubs come the end of the season. Right now, I don't think he'd be even considered.
I don't need a VPN. I've got nothing to hide. This is what I used to tell myself before I hooked up with LibertyShield.com. Not only is my home internet now fully encrypted, but I can now access all the websites I want, whenever I want, and do so from absolutely anywhere. As a Liverpool fan, I love to know I can now watch every match, regardless of whether it's on UK TV or not. My Liberty Shield VPN makes sure nothing is blocked and guarantees me super fast streaming speed throughout that match. You can get connected right now with their software package, which includes a 48-hour no-obligation free trial and instant access to their apps for Apple, Android, Fire TV, PC, Mac, and Android TV. Or go a step further like I have and get one of their pre-configured VPN routers. These small but powerful devices allow you to easily connect every device in your home to VPN, making it the perfect solution for smart TVs, Mag boxes, and games consoles. Visit LibertyShield.com today and use coupon code AIVPN25 to get 25% off at checkout.
What formations have you two gone?
I've gone 4-2-3-1.
4-3-3.
Yeah, mine can be either one. So we'll
Well,
go for a midfield pair and then the more offensive one.
yeah. So, Karl, you go first. Who have you got?
So the more holding two, then let's say Moises Caicedo and Bruno Guimaraes, both exceptional players, both had really good seasons last year, and therefore you want again to be seeing that consistency in their game, the importance to their team. A little bit of a mitigating circumstance for Caicedo, I suppose, in terms of the transfer, the vast change at that club and in the team especially. But I don't think he's hit anywhere near where he's capable of in terms of performance levels individually. Even in terms of like athleticism and positional work and that kind of thing, I think he's been well off it so far. Guimaraes, I don't know, he just looks very, very sluggish to me at the start of this season. I don't think he's moving the ball anywhere as quickly. He himself is certainly not being as aggressive and as involved in Newcastle's build-up play, which you can argue is a positive for the team because they were quite reliant on him in terms of progressions last year. But he's capable of a lot more. So those two.
I have exactly the same too. I considered Enzo Fernandez quite strongly because I don't think he's been what he can be either. But Moises has been well below the level of what he was last season. I thought up until February when he got injured and then played through the injury and was hampered the rest of the way, I thought Guimaraes was the best player in the league last year, and he has been a disappointment. Now, some of it is a tactical issue with Newcastle. They're missing a lot of good players, but I don't like you. I think he's been sluggish. I don't think he's passing the ball as sharply as he was last year. So I went with him because I had higher expectations for him. As much as I think Enzo's going to be a great, great player, Guimaraes kind of hit a baseline of being a great player last year, and he's fallen well below that this year. Like Moises and Guimaraes, for me, along with Rodri, and you can make arguments for others, like whatever your top five midfielders in the league last season were, I think Moises and Guimaraes had to be in those top five, and neither are anywhere close this year. Like they're miles off, especially Moises. He just doesn't look right at Chelsea. That partnership with Enzo it doesn't have enough burst, and it was fine when it was him and Alexis because of the way Brighton play and how much possession they had. Chelsea don't play the same way, and like they're using Conor Gallagher as like a 10, and he's performing pretty well, but the other two are just not performing at all. Guy, who's your midfield?
I went for Caicedo as well. Basically just parrot what you have both said. I'm so disappointed. Not saying he would have been awful for us as well, but the way we missed out on him was just devastating. But the way he started, you think, I know he would have been much better for us because we're not an absolute shit show, but it does help dampen the blow. The other two I went for is Casemiro. Self-explanatory.
Yeah.
It's obviously it was a weird transfer anyway, last season. But eventually when he did get in his groove, he was basically their entire midfield because he was playing with Eriksen, who can't move, and Bruno, who is a 10 for them. And basically their entire fulcrum. Whereas this season, he cannot move. He's just god awful. So spending 80 mil on a lad who's probably on his last legs is not a good idea. Probably see Varane for this as well. And my other one, I went for Tonali rather than Bruno G because I think he had that first game, I think it was a Villa, the first game where I think he scored twice or whatever it was, and he was excellent. But I think the knock-on effect of him coming in affected Bruno G. He's had the betting scandal, which does knock him down a few points as well, seeing as he can't play now till...
That is quite disappointing, to be fair.
Yeah,
to be suspended.
You spend 60 million and you get 7 games out of him.
Yeah, so that's pretty disappointing in that regard. And after that massive high to begin with, I think him and Bruno G kind of got in each other's way. So betting scandal on top of that, I picked him over Bruno G.
I think that's fair. And I do think that the Tonali factor, like there's a lot of overlap between him and Bruno. And I wonder, did they sign Tonali thinking we've probably only got one more year of Bruno and then he's probably away. And he signed that new deal and he demanded a buyout, which they've given him. I wonder, was Tonali signed more as when Bruno goes, this will be your midfield to run and we'll just make it work in the interim? There's a lot of things they do very, very similar. Now, there's a lot of differences as well, but it just never seemed like it was an ideal pairing. You mentioned Casemiro. I mean, if anyone wants to know who ate all the pies, it was him. They got every last little bit of brilliance he had left in him last season, and he is washed. He, along with Rafa Varane, maybe they'll get a 2-for-1 discount, probably needs to start learning some Arabic because he is destined for the Saudi Pro League. Just on Caicedo, I think he would have been much better for us. But on Guimaraes, Karl, and I'll come to Guy on this, just as an aside, we know we need a 6. We know that that's the big issue with this team. One of the two big issues with this team right now. Would Guimaraes be high on your list, given the buyout is probably 80 to 100 million? If we were to pay that, do you think that would be a good move for us? If we were happy to pay it, if we had planned for that to be our move, do you think that would be wise?
It wouldn't be my first choice because I want a much more defensive first player in there. That's what I want. That's what I think works best for us, especially with how we're now setting up the midfield.
See, I agree. In this new shape, I 100% agree. If in the old shape, in a 4-3-3, with Trent as an actual right back, I'd be higher on it. But I think if you play him and Trent as a double pivot, like you're going to be wasting one of them because the other one's going to dominate the ball.
Yeah, I don't think it would be too much of a difference in terms of skill sets and what you want them to do to have an Alexis there right now, to be honest. Like a bit more feisty, a bit more mobility, fine. But in terms of on-the-ball skill set, yeah, you're still not getting what you want in the right areas, I don't think.
I think that's fair. Guy, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm team meat as well. Our midfield lacks it. We need it. Say if you offered me, for argument's sake, Doucouré or Guimaraes. I think Guimaraes is definitely a better player, but for what we need, I'd pick Doucouré every day.
I'm the same. If you're going to spend that type of money, knock on Real's door, see if there's any movement on Tchouaméni. Maybe see if Chelsea would
just clock for his bi-yearly pop in for Tchouaméni.
That's it. Like because he'd be due. Maybe check in and see if there's any chance Chelsea just want to give up on Caicedo. But Doucouré or Boubacar Kamara would be if we're buying from the Premier League, they'd be the two I'd go for. Right, Karl, Guy's given us his 3 midfielders. Give us your attacking midfielder then.
Okay, Kai Havertz.
Fair.
I'm not really going to add a lot.
Nothing more needs to be said. I've gone for Mason Mount.
Oh God!
Do we need to add anything else?
You need to say Kai Havertz can now play left back as well after the weekend.
Yeah. I've actually gone for Kai Havertz as my right winger because I did go 4-2-3-1 and I had to put him in the team. So I'll just give you my 3 behind the striker. I've got Havertz, I've got Mount. I don't think we need to talk about either of them. And I've gone for Marcus Rashford because I actually don't know if there's been a more disappointing player in the league this year. After that run he had off the back, well, before and then off the back of the World Cup, he was so good and he's been so poor. So he had to be him. Who have you got then in your wing positions, Guy?
This is how much Kai Havertz is not on my radar. I didn't even consider him for this team because I forgot about him. So he's not even in my team, even though he has been... I think he's just been shit rather than disappointing because I had no expectation of him from Chelsea. But you two obviously have the Bayer Leverkusen days to reminisce about, so I just always think he's been shit. I agree with Rashford, he's my left winger. I don't know why, just because I made this last second, I went Anthony right wing. Like, United had a good season last year. But personal issues, let's go with that. He's now in and out of the team a bit more, considering he basically had that whilst he was fit all to his own. Like, he's competing with toddlers, and the toddlers are winning. Garnacho's a better. I'd rather have Garnacho. I'd rather run with Palestri. Amad Diallo will be back from injury soon. Like, he went from being a 80, 90 million pound signing to now looking, oh, we've got an 18-year-old here. So I think this is probably my one I'm least happy with, because I didn't have many expectations of him anyway. But the price tag alone, just even if it is from a year ago, he's just been shit. And Rashford, mainly because he's in my draft FPL team, and he's been absolutely shit. Not like no goals, no creativity, not even like a cross. He doesn't do anything. He just tries to dribble past 5 people and shoot.
I think that's fair. Karl, who are your wingers?
So Rashford, to complete the sweep, I've got him on the left, and actually I've gone all Man United on the wings because I've also gone for Anthony. Again, I think in similar vein to Ramsdale, my disdain for Anthony as a player is long founded, but whereas Ramsdale, there was never any belligerent optimism, let's say, from the management, because he literally signed another goalkeeper this season. Anthony, all we've heard about him is that he can still play a prominent role and is still really important and is still a great player and all the rest of it. And here we are, a third of the way through the season, and this potentially great player is yet to score or assist in the Premier League this season whatsoever. He has as many shots and openings and all the rest of it as any other player, basically outside of Fernandes and Rashford in the United team. Like, he's still the one who will take on chances and take on shots, but they're so poor and so poorly executed, and the decision making of them is awful, that he is, I think, an attacking liability to the team. Like, he doesn't produce enough individualism to justify the bad decisions that he takes. And then when you factor in that most of the time he doesn't really contribute defensively an awful lot. I mean, the team is rubbish defensively as a whole, but he doesn't really, outside of like the odd burst where he'll try and make a tackle and get the crowd up and, look all tough because he's got tattoos on his neck or whatever. No, he just doesn't do anything. He doesn't do good team things in either half of the pitch for me. So as long as they keep suggesting that he's really good and is going to be really important, and he doesn't be, he can stay in my team.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Right. So we've all done 10 positions. Guy, you have another winger shout. Give us that quickly.
Mitoma, because I actually rate him, and I don't think he's matched last season, and I thought he'd build on it, whereas he's kind of just not. I don't think the rotation from De Zerbi helps, because it doesn't
he's not getting the rhythm. I think the lack of a Stupinan is hurting him as well, to be fair. Right, last position then. So far we have all gone Gvardiol, we've all gone Caicedo, and we've all gone Rashford. They're the 3 that we all have in our teams. Number 9 then, Karl, who have you got?
Mikel Antonio.
Interesting. Guy, who have you got?
I went Richarlison because I thought no Kane, no more excuses, new manager. He'd be the number 9. He lost his position within 4 weeks of the season, and now he's obviously out injured. But I thought he'd actually build into something, but he lost his spot to Son, then lost his spot to Mana Solomon, then lost his spot to Brennan Johnson. So he's getting battered on all accounts there.
Yeah, not a good year for him. Karl, just give me some rationale behind the Mikel Antonio thing, because I'm surprised you had any expectation for him, considering we were both quite critical of him last season.
So, yeah, this isn't really my expectation. Again, it's the fact that he keeps being played and keeps being used as a starting option in the team. And I understand that in this one, there's a little bit more of a team aspect to it, because he's a bit more of a facilitator in a similar way to, let's say, Dominic Solanke, something like this. But I just see so many good attacking players at West Ham who would contribute more in different ways. He remains a starter. 11 starts in 12 games in the Premier League this season. He doesn't really contribute anywhere near enough. Running around and some good hold-up play and some decent link play and a bit of channel work and good defensive work and stuff like that is fine. But for a team who should be a bit more progressive this year, especially after what they achieved last season and, all the talk about Moyes himself this year, and that there's finally been some regeneration in the team elsewhere. You mentioned Emerson Palmieri not necessarily helping, but he is a new part of the team, at least. Like he's not called Creswell, basically, is what I'm saying here. And Alphonso Areola, obviously, in goal. And there's just been a decent start to shift that team in a bit of a different direction. And you're still going with Antonio up front, who is now 33. Wasn't really a striker to begin with, just had a really good run of form there for a while. It's just not enough. I want to see more from that. 2 goals this season for the first third of the campaign is West Ham have better than this, and I think that they are capable of more. That's why I've gone for him.
Yeah, and they definitely look a better team in Europe with Bowen up front and then Kudus playing right, Paqueta and Benrahma completing the 3 behind. You'd wonder, would they just have been better off keeping Gianluca Scamacca and having him with, say, Bowen, Paqueta and Kudus behind? I think they would have been considerably better. Antonio's been, he's been poor. I mean, 2 goals is unacceptable when your winger scored 8. And it's not like you're a massive facilitator either. I went with Cody Gakpo. Now, it's not all his fault. He's been, I think, pretty poorly used. But I just don't feel like he impacts games at the moment. And even the couple of games he's scored in, I think he's played pretty poorly in. Brentford at the weekend, I thought he started to look a bit more lively. But if we go back to March, April, people were talking about him as our long-term number 9, our new Bobby. I don't think anybody would swap him for Darwin now. And in part, it's because Darwin has kicked on. But I do think Gakpo has regressed from where he was last season, so I went with him.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think he's been fairly underperforming all season, to be honest. He's not, I wouldn't say, even ahead of Diogo Jota at the moment in terms of all of Liverpool's attacking options, and obviously playing in midfield. 1, maybe didn't help him, but 2, he didn't help himself because he's not had a big impact there at all.
No, agreed. So let's just wrap these teams up. I've got Ramsdale, Trent, Dunk, Diaz, Gvardiol, Caicedo, Guimaraes, Havertz, Mount, Rashford, and Gakpo. Karl, what did you have?
Robert Sanchez, Joel Veltman, Rafael Varane, not Van der Vaart, Josko Gvardiol, Andy Robertson, Guimaraes, Caicedo, and Havertz, and then Anthony, Antonio, and Rashford. And
Guy, what did you have?
Onana, Trent, Van der Vaart, Dunk, Gvardiol, Tonali, Casemiro, Caicedo, Anthony, Richarlison, and Rashford, and I'll leave Matoma out because I like him.
So you did have Van der Vaart.
You had Van der Vaart in, who's a 5'7" attacking midfielder. No wonder he's disappointing.
That's what I'm continuing. He'd probably do better than Varane.
He probably would be better. Even at this point in his life, he'd probably be better than Rafa Varane has been this year. Want to give a special shout out to one of Karl's picks there, Mikel Antonio. Not only is he playing shit, but he does his podcast and talks an immense amount of shit and presents himself as some sort of top class player, and then doesn't back it up with the performances. So congrats to him on that. And we will leave it there for today. Karl, do you have anything you want to plug before we go?
No.
There you go then. Guy, have you anything to plug before we go?
Probably not. I'll be on 2-Footed on Friday, but you probably plug that anyway. See you then.
Yeah, there'll be 2-Footed every day, Daily Red every day. There will be a Buzz podcast tomorrow, all going well. There is a 2-hour extravaganza celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the first Anfield Index podcast. Myself and Trev recorded at the weekend with Guy's help, and we needed Guy's help to get it done. And what else? Oh, the Transfer Committee podcast is Thursday night, which I had actually forgotten until Mo Chatter reminded me earlier today. So loads coming from me, loads from everybody else. Mo will be on the spot, and the usual Pro Plus and Scouser Tommies and Under Pressure and all the rest, all coming this week. So do stay tuned for all of it. And Rival Recon too, let's not forget Mr. Setti. So that's it. We will see you all later in the week. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.
Sports Social Podcast Network.